Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Property Pros and Cons, episode A17. Episode 17. I was reading an article today in the San Diego Union Tribune that said that the luxury home market in San Diego is not doing as well as it did during the pandemic or before. And San Diego is actually one of the uh, most precipitously cooling housing markets in the country. And the way my mind works, I kind of was reading that article and I was like, there's a lot of people who own houses and they're getting divorced. And the more money the house is worth, the more fighting there's going to be over the divorce and the value of the house and stuff like that. And so I thought maybe I could talk to a family law attorney, and maybe the family law attorney could talk to me about the things people should think about when they get married and own property, or maybe the things people should think about when they get married, period. Because property is usually related to getting married and all these sorts of things. And so I went through my Rolodex, not like a real Rolodex, because I hear the word. I don't know what a Rolodex actually is. I think it like rolls or something, like it turns. Um, and there's like stuff in it, like names of people. Anyway, so I went through my Rolodex and I thought, who do I know who's a family law attorney who would be willing to go on camera and talk about all of the things that go on in family law? And I thought, how about Julie Wolff? Julie Wolff is great. And the thing that I love about Julie, other than the fact that she's an extremely competent attorney who has done really amazing things in her career, is that she has this way of like saying things kind of quietly, and yet they're like so spot on or so perfect or so funny, and it's just great. So I thought, what better person to be a guest on our show? And I brought her on. And so we will, after this brief introduction, talk to Julie Wolff, who is a family law attorney in San Diego. All right. Thank you for being with us, Julie. Julie is a certified child welfare law specialist who serves as an attorney mediator and is also the owner of the Law and Mediation Office of Julie O. Wolff. Julie holds an LLM in dispute resolution from Pepperdine University's School of Law's Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution, and her legal practice primarily focuses on child welfare, juvenile dependency, dispute resolution, and family law. That's a bit of a tongue twister. She also serves on the San Diego County Court's Family Law Panel for appointment as minors counsel. She received her Juris Doctorate from California Western School of Law, along with high honors in two concentrations, trial practice and preventive problem solving. Following graduation, she clerked for the Honorable Judge Leon sorry, I can't spell this person's name, or pronounce this person's name. Julie can probably help us with that. At the Third Judicial District Court of the state of Nevada before jumping into juvenile law as a parents attorney in Sacramento, then as a minors attorney in San Diego. In the summer of 2016, Ms. Wolff started her own practice focusing on juvenile dependency, dispute resolution, and family law. Due to her passionate interest in public service and human rights, Julie serves as the co-chair of the LGBT committee and is on the Lawyers Club of San Diego's executive board. Julie is currently the chair of the juvenile law section of the San Diego County Bar Association, and she is also a member of the Tom Homan Law Association and the National Association of Counsel for Children. Wow, that is a lot to think about for one human being such as yourself. So thank you so much for being with us, Julie.
Thank you so much for having me, Franz. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's great to be able to be on your show and kind of see you in action. I did want to correct one thing. I'm the former chair for juvenile law. I'm not currently the juvenile law chair. Not
Awesome.
this year.
That is probably one of the better feelings, right? Of being the
Yeah.
former chair as opposed to being the sitting chair.
Yeah.
I've heard that the best like title is immediate past whatever.
Right.
So
Definitely more time for sure.
absolutely. So, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me when I was reading your bio is that you got um, high honors in I mean, trial advocacy, trial practice, whatever. Like everybody kind of knows what that is, but I'm really curious about, or not everybody does, but I certainly know what that is. But I'm really curious about preventive problem solving and like, what is that? And is that something that you actually incorporate into your practice?
So yes, so preventive problem solving, I guess at Cal Western, was a lot of different things, but one of them was just using dispute resolution techniques to try to bring people to a solution. I know in law school everyone thinks it just trains you to go to court and to just fight everything, but at least at Cal Western, we were also trained to try to resolve issues because people don't have most people don't have unlimited funds to pay for their attorneys. Johnny Depp may, uh, but the rest of us really don't. So being able to talk to people, being able to try to explain the law and what's going to happen if they do go to court, and give them the opportunity. Hey, if you want to go to court and have a 2-week trial, it's going to cost you, probably over $20,000. And this is what you're going to get. Or we can try to resolve this with a stipulation in the next couple days, and this is still what you're going to get. You're just not going to have to pay all those trial costs. So just kind of letting people know their alternatives and being able to use techniques sometimes of reframing when people are very mad at one another, and the especially in family law there sometimes a lot of anger and hurt feelings, to be able to kind of reframe that, and be able to say that in a different way that the party maybe won't be so offended by, can definitely be helpful.
Yes. I imagine that kind of telling your former spouse, well, I'm pretty sure that having your grandma or your mother looking after our child means that they're going to turn into a derelict drug addict, so we can't have her look after him. It might
Yeah.
be reframed to, I really care about our child's health and well being, and sometimes I think your parents' values don't align with mine. How can we resolve this?
Certainly, can we look at alternative childcare providers? Can definitely be more helpful than and insulting someone, and it
Yeah.
so.
Absolutely. So obviously we're here to talk about family law. And do you primarily focus on people with kids, or do you also see more people without kids or with grown
Hmm.
children getting divorced?
Good question. I would say I want to say it's about half and half for me.
So
So
there are people with grown children who still get divorced.
yes, grown people with grown children still get divorced. People that don't have children yet still get divorced, and then of course there's people with children that sometimes get divorced as well.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I
Yeah,
guess this is just kind of an unfortunate reality of getting married is that, you love each
right.
other a whole lot, and then at some point you're like, wait a minute, I'm going to have to spend the rest of my life with this person and the misery that
Yeah.
they're causing me.
Yes,
So,
and one of the, I guess, different factors usually with people with kids, and especially young kids, is one party normally wants the kids to grow up in the house, and it's just so important that there's not really a quantitative value that they place on it. But uh, sometimes just looking at the big picture and being able to say, you know what, if we sell this house, we're both going to have $300,000 to get our own apartment, maybe start our own business, things like that. It's going to be the better thing in the long term for the kids than doing everything we can to stay in this house and really not having an extra dime.
And I wonder, how often does that happen? Like, how often do people feel like, I want to keep this house for the kids, for my own sentimental reasons, because now I want to put in like these mahogany floors that you refused to let me put in while we were married, so I can finally have what I want.
Hmm. Well, everyone always says when people are divorced, the courts try to get them to have like the same standard of living. However, obviously that's impossible because you're going from one household, everyone living into this under the same roof, to now two households. So all those expenses, rent, utilities, gas, I mean, cable, it's all now going to two houses. So a lot of times people do just want to or say they want to keep the house because they want the kids to have consistency. And certainly getting divorced is difficult for kids, and moving is difficult for kids, and change in general is difficult for kids. But for some people, being able to look at the long term and being able to have a little extra spending money to get the kids, tutoring, or to make sure that they can keep playing football or water polo or whatever that is, um, might be in the long term a little bit better than doing anything they can to stay in the house.
Right. And I mean, how much of that, from just like a practical perspective, how much of that is like an emotional desire to sort of not let go of something, and how much of that is, actually a realistic, rational consideration of the situation?
Well, I want to say close to 100% is an emotional decision because they don't want to change and they don't want their kids to have to endure change.
Oh, yeah, and I definitely think that that's something that happens for people is, oh, I don't want my kids to endure change. Like, we're already, and I mean, I'm sure there's like a lot of guilt and shame and all of these other emotional words that pop up for people as they're getting divorced. And then, I think letting go of that large asset oftentimes really uh, brings into the forefront the fact that this is really happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course one parent's in the house, and unless of course it's one of those nesting arrangements, where mom stays in the house 1 week with the minors, and then mom leaves and dad comes in and stays in the house the next week with the minors. um, that has its own problems with privacy and consistency. But also, if one parent has the house and another parent's living somewhere else, then there's still the back and forth. And then sometimes also the parent that's not in the house anymore, sometimes feels a right to stop by at any time and do things that otherwise would not occur after a separation.
Or really, frankly, might not occur to, to strangers. Like,
Right.
I would probably not just like randomly knock on somebody's door and be like, hey, can I use your
Right.
bathroom? I was in the
Yeah.
neighborhood.
Or just use your key. I was stopping by. I wanted to see how the dog's doing, and it can be more difficult to set boundaries under those situations. Sometimes, of course, sometimes spouses get along really well and are able to co-parent very well. Every once in a while, I do see that, and so sometimes those are great decisions for kids to be able to do that. But I think it depends on the individual situation, and it is important to take inventory about how much of your decision is based on reality and the best interest of the kids and your financial situation, and how much of it is based on a need to not change and to hold on to the past. And um,
Right. I mean, all of these wonderful and amazing emotional things that people go
yeah.
through when they go through
Yeah.
significant life changes like divorce.
Yep.
Um, and I guess another sort of question that I have is, um, related to what you put, what your kind of bio, you talk about the LGBTQ community, and sort of this. I mean, the right to marriage, at least in the LGBTQ community, is not something that has existed for ever. It's something that's kind of relatively new, and I wonder, as in family law, do you see sort of arrangements within that community that might not exist with the married couple simply because the two people in the relationship couldn't get married? So do you see like, other types of random arrangements?
So sometimes I do still see domestic partnerships, and then maybe domestic partnerships that have become marriages. But other than that, like more recently, I guess in California, I, I feel like things have been pretty equal. I think it's kind of the similar in that sometimes spouses just don't really understand what community property in California means, and then also with the exceptions such as like property inheritance, things like that. Just to discuss that a little bit, community property is in California, unless you have a prenuptial agreement or something otherwise, uh, community property is what you've earned during marriage is going to go half to you and half to the spouse. So, with, of course, some exceptions, and one exception is gift, devise, bequeath, something like that. So, for example, if grandma leaves you a house while you're married, so you're married, but grandma has left you the house is in your name. So now at that point, it's your separate property because it's been a gift to you. However, you can change community property by doing things like putting it also in your spouse's name or making a contract to give part to them. You can also change some of the character of the property just by using community property funds, say to fix up a bathroom, to pay the mortgage, things like that. And so then you and your spouse are going to end up, if you do get divorced, end up fighting about how much is your separate property, and how much is community property.
Yes, and I mean, just thinking about like attorney's fees and billable hours, fighting about what's community property and what's not community property, and what is it like something like a fancy word,
Well,
like transforming the property into from like
Yes. So, and like being able to trace it back. So, ideally, if
exactly.
you've commingled any property, you want to be able to just trace it right back, follow the river and make it really clear. But unfortunately, normally people don't understand that. And so, what might have at first been a separate property asset gets very tainted by, say, community property funds. Like I said, fixing up the kitchen. Now, community property funds are paying the mortgage, paying the property taxes. Over time, maybe fixing something else up. Refinancing the house also muddies the waters even more. So things like that will all make things even more difficult to trace back. And so if you've got an item that, say, was your separate property 30 years ago, and now the waters have been muddied in many ways over the last 30 years, it could be very, very difficult for you to be able to clearly trace back and be able to say, hey, my initial investment, this is separate property, but everything else is community property, because you can probably be able to reasonably believe that your spouse is probably going to think at this point, it's been 30 years, it's all community property. And probably you might think, no, it's mostly separate property. And so then you have to go to court and spend money to parse it out and argue about it.
Right, which I think is very expensive because it sounds very complicated, and it's not. I think that people, they think about divorce and they're like, oh, it's the lawyers. It's not just the lawyers. Like in terms of this, like retracing, I assume you're going to have to bring in some sort of accountant or other type of financial professional to trace the funds back, and those are considered expert witnesses, and I don't think they charge as much, if
Right.
not more, than attorneys do.
Certainly. Yeah, attorneys don't want to be responsible for doing that. So it's a lot of bank statements and mortgages and changing mortgages and having someone that's a professional and that's a neutral third party, um, be able to parse it out and analyze it and then come back with usually what's going to be an approximate, because it's going to be, again, very very hard to specifically trace back, and especially when you have appreciation like in San Diego. The what the house was 30 years ago is going to be significantly less than what the house is worth now. So you've got
Right.
all that appreciation, and that's another issue that the person that who the house wasn't gifted to is going to probably say, hey, I want the percentage. We spent 50% on this house, community property, so half of it or more is community property. And then of course the person that had the original gift is going to say, no, no, we spent $100,000 on this house over the last 30 years. So hey, 100,000 is community property. I'll give you 50,000. Bye bye. And that's a dispute.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that sort of hearing what you're talking about, at least as it relates to all of the finances, it really sounds like running a business. So if you are truly running a business, you keep your funds separate. You're not using, your personal credit card that you take to, go to Cabo to pay for your clients, whatever. And so there's like a
Right.
clear separation between that, clear separate bank accounts. But the reality is most couples do not do that. They don't,
Right.
like, no couple operates as a couple assuming that they're going to get divorced, because that's not why you get married in the first place.
Correct. They don't do that. And yeah, they don't do that. And even if one spouse is, say, renting out the property, um, that can be traced, separate property. You've got your own account that you're renting the property out. That was a gift from grandma. You got a good stream going, but then what happens is you need to, again, the bathroom or the kitchen, and then now you've got community property funds going into make the kitchen nicer and to spruce up the shower, and now you've commingled again.
Right. So it's like very easy to commingle funds. I mean, it is, you know,
Yeah.
California is that's what it
Yeah.
does.
And a lot of people don't want to say, hey, we're going to commingle funds. Let's do a postmarital agreement and just hammer this all out. Here, sign there, and there, and we'll get it notarized. And we've got this great postmarital agreement just in case. That is a way to cover yourself. But a lot of people, they don't think they're going to get divorced. So they don't think about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's easy. I as an attorney, I tend to do like partnerships and business agreements, and between businesses. And anybody running a business usually assumes like, oh, okay, we might break up at some point, just because that's the nature of business, and so they want to have clear lines. But you know, it being married also seems like there's at least partially in California there is a business component to it, but I think that people don't think about that,
Right.
which is
Definitely. Definitely.
really unfortunate
Yeah.
for
The
them.
the businesses makes things more difficult. And I even had a case a couple weeks ago where the people are getting divorced. The mom's still living in the home. And now the mom has allowed some relatives to come into the home to live with her to get some extra rent and whatnot. And now we're in a situation where she's getting rent from the relatives, and one of the relatives is also operating a business from the home, which has additional liability issues really for both parties, because the home's still under the name of both parties. So operating a business from a home where people are coming into the home and getting a service is another is another problem.
Right.
And it's a liability for both parties, even though one's the only one living there.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing. Like, I do think about this, and everybody often I hear, oh, lawyers just they look for the worst, or they've got this like gray cloud of doom that they bring with them. But it's because we like people like ask us to go under their gray clouds of doom that we
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean, even
go.
if, I know some people, like to operate garages on the weekends and fix up people's cars and just charge a friends and family rate. But the reality is, if that person comes to get their car fixed up and they trip over the hose, that's a problem. That's a liability for the people that own the house.
Right, exactly. And I mean, if they didn't think about that beforehand, they certainly didn't get a commercial
Right.
liability insurance on the
Right, and a lot
property.
of the businesses, they don't have they're not incorporated, they don't have, insurance, they're not even really a business, so
Right. Um, yeah, and that I mean, that, I guess that's just something that businesses or people need to think about.
right.
So, you talk about community property. You talked about we talked about like commingling of funds and all of that. Obviously I'm an attorney, and part of what I do is like title, and I care a lot about title because title is so much fun. No, not for most people, but I do wonder. Uh, what kind of things do you see with divorce and taking title? Like, are there different ways to take title? If there are two parties who are, who are say married and are getting married a second time, um, are there different ways that they can take title, and does that have an effect on what they do?
Certainly. So, well, I guess I wanna say I'm not quite sure that I understand the question, but if the house is acquired during the marriage, then normally it would be, community property, and we would also under California law, if one spouse dies without any agreement or anything like that, then the living spouse is going to get the whole property. But certainly there are ways, there are trusts, estates, there's different ways to be able to gift property. Also, if one spouse wants to gift it to the children. I mean, normally if it's the first marriage, normally it would go to the
The
other spouse
children,
and then to
yeah,
the children. But definitely in cases where it's a second marriage, normally people would want to have an agreement. They would want to have something that, if I put in $50,000 and you put in $50,000, if I die, then I want my part to go to my children, and that can be done. And uh, um, certainly you
yeah,
can hold title any way you'd like to.
yeah. I mean, you spot on answered my question and understood what I had asked, so that's awesome. Which is why you're such a good lawyer. Um, but yeah, and I kind of wonder, like, is this something that people think about? So, like, in your experience, like, do people even think about title when they're getting married or getting married a second time?
Well, that's a good question. I see. I'm a child of divorced parents, so it's certainly something that I always think about. But I feel like sometimes people don't think about that, and they also don't understand what community property is. We've got a lot of military here that are from other states where community property isn't a thing. They get divorced, and husband walks out with what he's making, wife walks out with what she's making, or even in a same sex couple, they're both walking out with what they have. um, so community property can be very new for people. They just don't understand what it is, so they don't think about it. I
Yeah,
think, yeah, I think though I do see a lot more people on their second marriage that do want to get a premarital agreement and just kind of lock down um, what their property is and what is going to happen in the future as well.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's like, okay, I went through this once. I'm not going to go through this again.
Yeah.
We're gonna.
Yeah. Yep. And people think about what they have now and not really what they might have in the future. So even someone that's 25 and getting married, if they do a premarital agreement, normally it's still like what they have now. And it's not like, hey, I've got this business and if it blows up, this is what's going to happen. Or
Right.
when I inherit my parents' business and I'm now working on that full time, this is what I expect. It's just with what we have now, this is what we have. And usually um, young people can be more protective if they try to think about not just where they are now, but where they're going and what they want to get out of what they're going,
Yeah, I
where
think
they're
that's
going.
yeah, I think that's a really valid point. Is this idea that people, and I mean this is real property pros and cons. So we're talking about property in general. If you are, I have known a lot of people who were when I was younger, they were younger and they got married, and then they ended up buying houses together, and some of them bought houses with their spouse with money that one inherited from a grandparent or a parent or somebody who died or whatever. And, it's still community property. And they, uh, actually, one of the people that I'm thinking of did have a premarital agreement because they
Hmm.
had substantially more assets than their spouse, and substantially more potential future assets than their spouse. And then the other person that I'm thinking of did not do that because they kind of were equal. Um, but this was also a situation where when you talk about, is this community property, is this not community property, these are really things to consider because they didn't have they need to think about that. And also, if the house appreciates and you know spouse
Hmm.
X gave $400,000 for a down payment and spouse Y gave zero, you know, there's some questions about that now.
Right. And if it's not clear, that's when you're going to spend the most money arguing about it because it's not clear. I really liked your example of, one of the spouse's parents gave them a gift. And I know we talked about that clearly, after maybe 2 years of marriage, Jan gets a house. Okay, that's separate property right there. Boom. But what happens when, Jan and Jack get married and as a wedding present, Jack believes that Jan's mom contributed $50,000 to the down payment on the house, but Jan believes that no, that it was to her for getting married, and there's really nothing other than the $50,000 going to the house. So you're going to really be spending more in attorney fees to argue about uh, who that is and how that's divided. So sometimes clearly writing it down or having a check to one party that's in separate property and then paid with separate property. But even sending, having that check go to Jan and then Jan now deposits it in a community property account and then uses it for the down payment. Now, right there, technically, you've used community property to pay for the down payment, even though, of course, Jan's arguing, no, it wasn't really community property. I can trace it back to my parents that just gave it to me, even though if they gave it to you, why did you just put it in a community property account?
Yeah, I mean that is true. And the thing that I often tell when I teach, the thing that I often tell my students is the reason why you have a casebook is because people hired a lawyer at the wrong time. If people hired a lawyer at the beginning, when they should have, to write everything out clearly and concisely, there would be no casebook.
Right,
I mean,
right.
yeah, I mean that really is the truth.
Everyone thinks they're entitled to something, and especially when you're getting divorced now and you've been wronged and you spent so much time invested in this horrible relationship. Now you're really owed a lot.
And that,
Um,
yeah, no, that I think that definitely happens. So, I mean, I think the so we do have a couple of viewer questions. So I will ask them once we get to our next segment. But I think the
Okay.
last question that I have for you before we move on to that is, what can people actually do? Um, and also, you know, specifically, I will ask this as it relates to women because one, you are a member or a board member of Lawyers Club or
Hmm.
a board member of Lawyers Club, but two, because the fastest growing demographic of people who are purchasing property other than married couples is single women. So, what specifically are things that single women should think about when they are buying property by themselves so that they can maintain their own sort of autonomy and property and assets if they get married. Um, if they get married,
So they want to make sure that well, I think if they've bought it, it's the title's going to be them if they're single at that time. So they're going to be the owner. And what they want to do is they want to make sure that if they are going to get married, then they can have a premarital agreement that specifically spells out that the home is theirs and what's going to happen if uh, if community property does use any funds. So, for example, they could have something like if we do use community property funds less than $20,000, then it's going to be a gift. It's going to be deemed a gift to my separate property. Or, for example, if the community gives a gift to my separate property, or if the community gives more than $50,000 to my separate property, then it's going to be paid back at $3,000 a month with 5% interest. But it will only be that, and it will not be, it doesn't change the character of the property. It would be considered a loan. So there are different things that can be done. And then, of course, if you get to the marriage and you don't have that, then you can always do a post-marital agreement. You can also specify that if anything is going to change, then you have to have uh, a written document for any transmutation, or else it would be considered a gift to your separate property. So you can definitely spell out what you want to do. You just have to make sure that you've spelled it out in writing and both parties understand what is being said. Um, if it's a premarital agreement, you want to make sure that the other party has really at least 10 days. Some people will say 7, but at least 10 days from the last draft to look it over, to think about it, and then to sign it.
I think that's really great advice. And I think the second question that I have for you, as it relates specifically to single women, is uh, in your experience as a family law practitioner, do you find that single women who then get married face more issues in terms of asserting their own independence that single men might not?
Hmm. Um, Interesting. I mean, I've found problems on really both sides. Sometimes one spouse may move out of the house, and that may make that difficult for a spouse later. However, sometimes one spouse moves out of the house, and it's a good move, and things go smoothly. It's difficult. I mean, more so than not, I do find that usually moms do have more time with their kids than dads, but that's not always the case. That's just something that I've noticed just from the cases that I've seen. In California, I do feel like the judges do try to be as fair as possible, and they don't care if you're a mom or a dad. They care if you're a good parent and that you're making decisions in the best interest of your children.
Yeah, well, I think that is a really good testament to the California court system. um,
Yeah.
and somebody who doesn't practice family law, I really don't know that, but I think that's really great. Well, we have a couple of viewer questions, and so we will break for our Ask the Pro on the Show segment, and
Okay.
then Julie will answer our questions, or answer your questions. Okay, this question is actually really kind of interesting. It is, do you find that people who are higher net worth have fewer issues when they get divorced?
No, I haven't found that. No. I mean, if you really parties that have nothing, um, they usually don't have that many issues because they're not fighting. However, if you have a lot of debt, then also you're going to be fighting a lot about the debt and how it's divided. But also, if you have a high net worth and you have a lot of assets, then you're obviously fighting about those assets. But I think we also have to remember that just because someone has a higher net worth doesn't mean that they're not living beyond their means and they don't have a lot of debt. I think one thing that has always surprised me as an attorney is couples that have so much debt, and it's really makes divorcing difficult because now debt is divided, and now they've got more expenses again because now they've got those two households with rent and everything that goes with it. Um, so the answer is no.
Actually, and before we get to the next question, that this is something that I have never actually thought about. But do you actually think that debt causes as many problems as assets in divorce?
Well, I guess part of me wants to say yes, but normally the thing with the debt is it's all debt. Nobody really cares that much about. I really want to pay. I haven't yet heard. I really want to pay off the Visa card, and I really don't want to have anything to do with the Mastercard. Normally, people don't just see debt as debt, whereas if it's an asset, they really want the car. They really want the Range Rover, but they don't really care about the Prius. So, and that I would say it's different.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So the second question, well, this is kind of an interesting question too, is what are some reasons that people do not think through issues and plan ahead of time, at least in terms of getting married?
Hmm. Well, great question, and I can only hypothesize. But I think sometimes we want a fairy tale, and life's tough, and we hope that relationships last forever and that there are no problems and that people can grow together in this world and have changing careers and jobs and kids and all these other things, and be able to morph and go forward together. And so they don't need a backup plan, and some people even think that having a backup plan is counterproductive because it really gives you a plan B right there. Whereas before, your only option is plan A, to stay married. And you don't want to have a plan B because that gives people an out. I think that's one thing. And perhaps, parents, other influences, not wanting people to have a premarital agreement, not understanding community property, not understanding the law.
Yeah, and I do wonder, like in your experience, and I mean, you kind of have. We spent about an hour talking about this, but like yes, there is the fairy tale, but the reality is, whether you have a plan B or not, like, does that keep people together? I guess you don't really know the answer to that, but like, I really do wonder, like, does not having a plan B keep
Yeah,
people together?
I'm sure someone's done a study, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but at least you see all of the people who did not have a plan B, and it did not keep them together.
Right. And I think also some people don't understand what the future is going to bring. We can't all predict the future. We don't know, grandma's going to pass away and leave me this house. And then we're going to end up living in the house because my husband or my wife lost their job, and now we're living in this house that's my separate property, but now we're paying the mortgage with my income, which is technically community property. We just can't imagine all the different things that could happen in the world. And sometimes it's the opposite way. Sometimes it could be we're doing really well financially, but now my mom, who has no money, needs to be put in a retirement community or needs to come live with us or something like that. So now I'm wanting to spend community property on my parent, because my parent hasn't planned ahead, and that can cause problems as well in a relationship, because obviously you've got another part that's not spending that money on their parent.
Right. And so that, I mean, I think that causes a lot of issues as well. So, I mean, I guess on some level, what I think is that planning ahead is like hard, right? Because everybody wants to. I think everybody wants to imagine a perfect, amazing, beautiful, rosy future where it's like, as we get more money and as we have more assets, we will love each other more because it will give us the opportunities to do all of these things that we didn't want to do. But like with more money, more assets comes more responsibility, more work, and also possibly, more opportunities to do other things, possibly without your spouse, or also possibly just
Right.
like, you know, okay, maybe when I was poor and had no money, I was attracted to this person, but like now that I'm rich, I will be attracted to this other person, and like this other person is like better for me, maybe.
Yeah. There, I think wants and needs, can definitely change over time, and
Yeah,
what we appreciate in other people can certainly change.
yeah, definitely. And I think, it also changes, and it can change with, financial circumstances
Right.
as well. And um, the last question, which is not super clear, but I'll post it up here anyways, is are there any issues with premarital agreements? What should I think about when getting one? I think you kind of talked a lot about this, but I think one of the questions that I have, or that I might talk about, or that might be helpful for you to talk about, is not so much like this general, are there issues with premarital agreements, but like what are some of the pitfalls of premarital agreements? Like if you go to an attorney who is not
Yes.
legally and does not know
Yes.
what she's doing, what issues can
Yes.
show up?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of issues, even for people that do know what they're doing, because it's impossible to predict the future. Also, California law is sometimes, like with some people try to contract out of things that they can't contract out of. You can't contract out of child support. You can't say, if we break up, you're never going to have to pay me child support. That's something that you can't contract out of in California. Spousal support is something that in California, it's sometimes an open question, and usually with premarital agreements, there's this disclaimer language. You can't say what's going to happen. The reason for spousal support is to make sure that the other person's taken care of, or has a little bit of a means to get them to be able to earn their own income and support themselves. But if one spouse it got cancer and can't work anymore, and now you're divorcing, the public policy is that the spouse that doesn't have cancer would try to help and support the spouse that does have cancer and can't work anymore. um, there are a lot of things that we can't predict. Businesses, your working time with businesses, what you might inherit, or how you might spend different money. So you definitely want to have attorney, both parties to have attorneys that know what they're doing, and that are um, able to at least put in the arrangement anything that you think may happen, and then clauses for what happens if something arises that you didn't think of. What are you going to do? How are you going to resolve that issue? You can at least agree to how you might resolve the issue in that agreement. And then also in California, you need to have a waiting period. So, and the waiting period is from the last draft of the premarital agreement. It's not today we've changed the premarital agreement and tomorrow you're going to sign it. It's now we've got the last draft of the premarital agreement. We're going to sign it in 10 days and we'll get married in 11 days. You want to make sure that there's adequate time for everyone to think about it, for everyone to get legal advice. I mean, really, you want to make sure that both parties have sought legal advice. And then again, there are some things you can't contract out of. So if you write down in a contract something that you can't contract out of, then that part's not going to be valid.
Right. Which means it is very important to put a severability clause in a premarital agreement, is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, really, really valuable advice. And I think the other thing that you mentioned, that honestly, many transactional attorneys, including myself, to be perfectly honest about it, is it's not necessarily always something that we think about, is this idea of, okay, we can't imagine or think of everything, but like, how are we going to figure it out if something comes up? So I think there's a lot of like mediation clauses or arbitration clauses or stuff like that, which should kind of address that. But sometimes you can do something a little bit more complex, like provided that if the business does, grow to a value of over, $10 billion, then it's going to be, the parties agree to attribute, X percentage of the growth to the contributions of this spouse and the other percentage of growth to the contributions of this spouse. So that's not like a premarital agreement splitting up the actual assets, but it is telling the parties how they are going to figure out what they want to agree to. And I think that's really important.
And that's part of preventive problem solving.
Right.
Because you don't know what it is, but you know that when it comes up, how you're going to deal with it, what process you're going to use to deal with it. And then one other thing that I think I should have said is in the premarital agreement, you have to disclose everything, and you have to give the best reasonable estimates as you can. So I think sometimes people don't take premarital agreements that seriously, and if you're not disclosing what you really have, the other person might not be able to be reasonably informed, and that's another problem that you have.
Right, and so that might include like I have a rich grandmother who lives in the main line in Philadelphia, who owns this house, and yes, she will eventually die. I was not her favorite grandchild, but things may change.
Well, I don't know if you need to specifically put that in, but if you know that, your dad owns Schlotsky's Deli, and that that you actually own 3% of Schlotsky's Deli, even though nobody really cares and you don't really do anything, you just let your dad handle it, but you own 3% of Schlotsky's Deli, you got to put it in the agreement that you own 3% of Schlotsky's Deli, or Jan's dog wash, whatever it is. Even if you think it's the smallest thing in the world, you got to put it in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really, really valuable and important lesson. Well, Julie, I have to say I really appreciate your being here. I also love having attorneys on my show because they're always like, I mean, not attorneys. The attorneys who come on my show specifically, they're always like very even keeled. Like they talk at a speed that I can understand. They break everything down in like really easy to understand ways, and they provide really great information that is not legal advice. Obviously, if you have a legal problem, you should find a lawyer immediately, because the tiny problem that you think you have today can become a much bigger problem later. And legal problems, I mean, they will not usually cause your death, but they will definitely cause the death of your bank account. So
yes, thank you so much for having me on. And that's a great point. Nothing is legal advice that I've said or done today. If you have an issue, you need to seek your own legal advice about your own specific problem. Thanks.
That is true. And if you need to do that, I'm going to pop up Julie's contact information. She is an amazing attorney. I really enjoyed talking to her. And I'm sure that you, in some capacity, will be happy to advise anybody who's watching the show on their legal problems in appropriate ways, however that goes.
Yes, thank you so much, Franz. It's great to be on your show, and I definitely appreciate what you do for the real estate community in San Diego. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I will be back next week with another Real Property Pro. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.